Hey, Bill. Hey, Bill.
Hey, Matt. How's it going?
Things are good. I don't. You can't see me, but through the magic of television here, I'm actually at my new office at the Daily Caller. I think it's the first time I've done it from this office, so good. It'd be a little bit of a different background than the old home office.
Is it palatial?
It's a very cool office, and I'm not just saying that because they have a ping pong table.
Are you recording from the ping pong table?
No, I'm actually in my palatial imitation office right now, but I try to get in at least 2 games a day, which I think is helping with my hand-eye coordination and maybe my blogging. So it's good times here at the Daily Caller. Fun office.
You can't see me in my office where I have a 1969 Princess phone. I'm on the cutting edge of telecommunications technology today.
Excellent. Well, it is the Weekend Blog, so we have to sort of step it up when it comes to technology and new media stuff. So glad to see you're helping out there. So where do you want to start?
Well, there's some new media news, both in your shop, the Daily Caller, and your crosstown rival, the Huffington Post.
Right.
Let's start with Huffington. Ever since the AOL buyout happened, there's been some debate, a discussion, how liberals and progressives might react to this. Would they celebrate Huffington Post's rise in the media food chain as example of success of a liberal media infrastructure, or would they be subject to more scrutiny now that being more of a corporate outfit? So this week you had, I guess it was last week, that they highlighted a blog post from Andrew Breitbart, who some might know actually was one of the people behind the scenes that launched Huffington Post despite his conservative background. But he's Matt Drudge's right-hand man, and that experience was tapped to get Huffington Post up and running. So there's been a personal relationship there, though he's never really blogged for the site before, not to my knowledge. And on all that initial working behind the scenes was before Breitbart was really a public conservative provocateur himself. And now since the whole Shirley Sherrod incident, which was, I'd say, fairly seen across the board as being a hack job and misrepresenting her views, even Glenn Beck has made that, drawn that conclusion. The online activist group Color of Change, which most notably played a big role in the Jena 6 protests, is calling for Huffington Post to drop Breitbart as a contributor because he is not merely a conservative. There's other conservative voices at the site, but that he's a race baiter and a discredited figure. And so they've launched an online petition, and Huffington Post has responded by making the argument that we have a range of voices on the site, we've had other conservative voices on the site, his posts get lots of comments, it's all part of the conversation, so there's no issue here. So I don't know if this represents, I don't think it represents a complete liberal rejection of the Huffington Post, but you're starting to see fissures in how some liberals view the Huffington Post, treating it more as just another media outlet subject to the same standards of criticism and not necessarily part of the team.
Right. Well, a few thoughts there, Bill. I mean, first of all, I think that this is probably a calculated effort by Huffington to push back on the notion that she is a liberal and that the Huffington Post is a liberal blog or a liberal website. I mean, obviously with the AOL, purchasing Huffington Post and Ariana taking over, running a lot of things. And by the way, the latest reports are that some of the sites are going to completely go away, like Politics Daily. I mean, that's another whole question. As you know, that's where I wrote.
You jumped ship just in time.
Yes, I did. But, how many times did I or David Korn or whomever go on TV and get the name Politics Daily out there? I just, it seems so weird to me to have a brand that I think has pretty good name recognition and pretty good reputation now, presumably disappear. I would question that, but who knows? who knows why. But going back to Breitbart, so I feel like, Huffington, by the way, just hired Radley Balco, who is a libertarian blogger, notable libertarian blogger. I think he was
on law and order issues is a specialty.
Right. And I think he was at Reason Magazine, and he has a blog, or he had a blog called The Agitator.
And a lot of folks on the left had praised his work when it came to issues of police, search and seizure, civil liberties, that sort of thing, drug war. So he has a certain currency on the left as well, even though he works for a libertarian outfit, had worked for a libertarian outfit.
That's a good point. So maybe he is a really great example of how she can sort of move to the right without alienating some of the left. But I think with Breitbart, I don't blame Ariana. I think that he is a good addition, to the site. I mean, it's not like he went to work for her, but having him on the site, gives them more diversity. I think that's an intentional strategy. But having said that, I mean, Huffington Post, I don't want to, misportray them. I mean, they have had conservative voices on their site almost all along, at least for years. There have been conservatives. In fact, I myself, as I've noted before, have written a couple guest posts on technology at the Huffington Post. So it's not like they weren't open to having occasionally conservative people contribute to the site. My real question would be, why does Breitbart do this at this moment? Why does he decide to do it? I don't know that that's necessarily helpful to conservatives, but from her standpoint, I don't think he's a bad person. I don't think he's a race baiter, and I think he gets traffic, and I think it's probably good business for Huffington.
Well, it's definitely. I mean, I think this further codifies Huffington Post as a place that's more interested in stirring the pot than pursuing a specific political agenda. And I don't think that is all that different post AOL or pre AOL. I think it's always been the general MO. It's the AOL thing just sort of brought that more to light, and that doesn't make it right or wrong. It just that's what it is.
Right.
And
well, I mean, I would differ a little bit there, Bill. I mean, I think if I had to say, is she more interested in ideology or more interested in page views? I think page views went out, but I've always thought, and we've talked about this before, but the most kind of insidious form of bias is that which is not obvious, right? And so you have, in some ways, conservatives participating to a degree at the Huffington Post almost gives them cover for their other, kind of leftist viewpoints. And we'll see how it shakes out. But I'm not so quick to say that she's moving away from, her ideology.
So we'll agree to disagree there to a degree. But I want one other point, though. I think people have always, I think there's been a question: how effective are media boycotts in general? Why was the left able to get Don Imus off of MSNBC, but never can lay a glove on Rush Limbaugh? And I think the difference there is in their audiences and their business models. Don Imus was not able to make a racist joke and sustain the type of audience that he had, which was sort of a very heterodox audience, whereas Rush Limbaugh says conservative things to a conservative audience. So when you try to attack him for saying conservative things, his audience doesn't care. So there's no, and the advertisers know what they're getting. So there's not been the same kind of leverage to pressure him to do things differently. So right now you have Color of Change trying to apply a standard to Huffington Post. Hey, you said you'd be different. You said you wouldn't be like other media outlets, and now you're taking on somebody who is widely discredited. But if Huffington Post's business model is not about that, it's about who can stir the pot most effectively and attract more attention, attract more clicks and comments, then Breitbart fits into that model. So that attack from Color Change doesn't hit that mark. So, we'll see if the petition works or not, but if it doesn't work, that would be why, because they're holding a standard to Huffington Post that Huffington Post is not trying to adhere to.
Yeah, it's not going to work. I mean, it's not going to work. Maybe it's still smart for them to do because we're talking about color of change now, and we wouldn't be otherwise. But it's not going to work. I mean, at the end of the day, it will work. It will work or fail based on whether or not it works as a business model. And I think if it works as a business model, then everything else is forgiven. But so
now, the thing that might not be forgiven, will this spark any kind of exodus of liberal bloggers from posting their material there? We've already, I've seen Dave Zirin, who is the sports reporter for The Nation. He tends to put the political lens on the sports industry. And he announced on his Twitter feed that he was not going to cross-post his work at Huffington Post anymore in support with the Newspaper Guild, who was critical of Huffington Post not paying its contributors. So it's separate from the Breitbart issue. But if more and more liberal bloggers say, I'm not going to put my stuff there because I don't agree with their practices anymore, I don't know if that's going to be enough to make Huffington Post change what they're doing with Breitbart or other contributors in the future, but that would be a potential pressure point if there's something lacking in content. I imagine they're going to have so much content they'll lose a few and not blink an eye. But if it became to be a lot, it's going to be some prominent people, that might be a pressure point.
Yeah, and I think that will be interesting. I don't know enough about the business model to know to what extent their traffic comes from having organic, regular folks who also blog, post stuff for free, versus the paid content, which obviously they're really ramping up. They've hired quite a few people to do different things. I mean, we just mentioned Radley Balco as an example. So, that I don't know. And in terms of...
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I actually don't think that the unpaid blogging columns of Huffington Post are what drives their traffic. It's their own scoops and their news aggregation that is the main driver of their traffic. So they have like 9,000 bloggers who had just sort of helped fill up some space for the most part. So me being one of them, I should say.
No, I mean,
I don't think the stuff that I put up there, for example, is what's driving the eyeballs to the site anymore. That might not be as big of a pressure point unless you had some really big names making a splash saying that aren't going to do it.
I mean, one of the potential things that could happen, and I think they should keep an eye on, would just be, obviously, there's a segment of conservatives who want nothing to do with the Huffington Post, not Andrew Breitbart, but others. And then, so if they've lost that, if they also lose a segment of the left, then the numbers start to add up. But I think at this point, it's just something to keep an eye on. So let's talk about the Daily Caller, right? So a little mini controversy, I guess, over news that Ginni Thomas, wife of Justice Clarence Thomas, would be contributing here at the Daily Caller. It sparked some outrage. I saw people like Dave Weigel at Salon, Slate, people like Ben Adler. I forget where he's at now. But so there has been some pushback. I mean, I think the way that the news. My only takeaway on this is I think the way that the news was portrayed was probably just a little misleading. It is my understanding that she's going to be doing interviews, so occasional interviews where she can interview a prominent person that maybe she knows or she has entree to, and to do videos to be posted at the Daily Caller.
So she's like the Sally Quinn of the Daily Caller.
Maybe that's
she's the in-house socialite.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe that's what it will evolve into. Maybe that makes me the Tony Kornheiser of the Daily Caller. But in any event, I mean that's cool and that's fine. But I think that the perception was that she was going to be here every day, writing column after column, and so for whatever reason, I feel like the pushback on that from some on the left was a bit much. But that's my take.
Well, I imagine there's two criticisms here. There's been a general criticism about Ginni Thomas's professional life that she is when she was being a lobbyist, being paid by people that might have business before the Supreme Court, and there was a potential conflict of interest there. then perhaps Clarence Thomas should be recusing himself from issues where paid clients of his wife, had business before the court, and they've generally shrugged that off. There is no set standard for Supreme Court justices recusing themselves. The only check on their behavior is impeachment by Congress, and so if you could muster up 2/3 of the Senate to convict Clarence Thomas of conflict of interest, then you'd have a case. But right now it's just outside political pressure trying to shame him into doing something differently,
Right.
which he's interested in responding.
And I mean, as
guess,
Politico also reported last week, I think. Well, I know Ben Smith wrote about it, but I don't know if it was his story originally. But as Politico reported, I mean, there is a concerted effort by the left to go after traditional conservative Supreme Court justices. So, I mean, not to say that...
Some might say conservative judicial activists.
I mean, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have a point, but it does mean that it's not an organic thing. I mean, there is a concerted effort to try to discredit not just Thomas, but Alito, and I've read about this at Daily Caller recently too, Scalia, and it's for various things, including, speaking for Coke Industries or at some retreat, different things like that. So, in any event, that was sort of part of the blog news this week. Any other sort of movements or people hirings, firings, blog movements? I mean, I said that I think. According to what I can tell, Politics Daily is actually going to go away. It's the last time I checked, it was still. You could still go to politicsdaily.com. There was like a thing at the header that you could click there and go to HuffPost Politics if you wanted.
Right. I think there's just an overlap there, and they decided that Politics Daily's brand was not strong enough to worth keeping. Whereas other brands like Pop Eater, for example, which is an AOL product, would stick around. I want to make one other Ginni Thomas point though. And I know you probably can't say too much because you're there, so I don't want to put you on the spot if it's not appropriate. But separate from the Clarence Thomas issue, there's a journalistic question that she has been an activist to date. Now she's working for a media enterprise, and she's going to be, as you said, interviewing people that she knows. I think Tucker Carlson, who heads up the caller, said she wasn't going to interview people that she has business with. That's going to be the line that they draw. But is that going to be sufficient for folks who? Because I know Tucker is trying to establish the caller as being a bona fide journalistic enterprise and not just an ideological hack job. So does Ginni Thomas help or hurt Tucker establish that sense of journalistic credibility?
Well, and you're right, Bill. I mean, I don't want to comment on that directly because you can see a Daily Caller banner behind me. Obviously, I'm biased. But I think this does open up a broader question or a broader trend, which I do think is where these things are merging more than they used to. I mean, there used to be a very, very clear distinction in the media between, people who did media and people who did activism. The blogosphere has certainly clouded that. And I've always thought, when campaigns do blogger outreach, that they should. It's very important for them to distinguish between who is like a journalist blogger, and I would, I consider myself in quotes a journalist blogger in the sense that I do have a conservative viewpoint, but I'm not going to, put up, click here to donate for so and so, right? But others, activist bloggers, someone maybe at Red State would certainly do that, and that's fine. That's that's what they do. I think you see this happening with newspapers, right? Too. I mean, so clearly someone like Chris Cillizza is a sort of ostensibly a down the middle political analyst, writes columns about campaigns and politics and whatnot. But you have other people. In fact, this is something we should talk about. The Washington Post recently started actually designated people. Do you know about this, Bill? Like some people are, they actually started classifying people like voices from the left, voices from the right. So that was a minor controversy. Different people were speaking out. But, so like the Washington Post, for example, it wouldn't, like let's say that they had Don Rumsfeld come in and interview somebody, and they put a video up of Don Rumsfeld interviewing somebody about, Libya. I mean, I don't think that would be inappropriate. Everybody knows that Don Rumsfeld, was in the Bush administration. Everybody knows that Don Rumsfeld has a point of view, and he's interviewing somebody else, and they're going to express their point of view. I don't think that undermines the hard reporting that the Washington Post does. I'm trying to get my light to come back on here. I've got everywhere I go, I have issues, and now the issue is that the main light in my office has a motion sensor, and apparently I don't move around enough when I'm sitting at my chair, because probably 10 times a day it just goes dark in my office. So anyway, that's sort of a broader story, and I think that I don't think that it is unusual in this day and age, but I just think that ethically you have to, if someone is working for a client, if they're it just has to be transparent. I mean, there are other potential conflicts of interest that everybody has from time to time if you're a writer, and it's just important to either not write about certain things or to disclose certain things. But that's my take on it.
All right. In 2012 news, we had the blog Think Progress, I think, lay a pretty hard hit on Newt Gingrich. An example of a blog, turning a nascent presidential campaign into knots. Gingrich had criticized President Obama earlier in March for not doing a no-fly zone. And after he got one endorsed through the UN, went on the Today Show and said that if he was president, he wouldn't intervene in Libya at all, and would have kept us much more quiet and tried to pressure Gaddafi out through back channels. And Think Progress juxtaposed the two quotes, showed them to be in contradiction to each other, and that started to really zoom through the tubes on Wednesday, and Gingrich felt obliged, without addressing Think Progress directly, putting up a post on his Facebook page laying out how his statements are not in contradiction to each other by saying, well, I was speaking earlier in the month predicated on the fact that Obama has publicly said we need to get Gaddafi out, and since he said that already, we should have a no-fly zone. But if I was president, I wouldn't have said that in the first place, and that's why my positions are not that's why I have my flip-flop. And I'm not sure if that reasoning is ending the story or reassuring Republican primary voters that Newt is ready to deal with the new media landscape. This was something that was raised by Politico. Is a 1990s politician like Newt Gingrich ready for the YouTube era when there's just a whole different type of scrutiny that gets placed on every little utterance that you make? I would think that this would not be a reassuring development for primary voters, but you in the conservative blogosphere might have a different response or a different sense of what other conservatives are saying.
Well, several things. I mean, one, I don't even know if it's a new media story. I mean, the fact is, he really contradicted himself, and so quickly that I even feel like this could have been a news story. Now,
well, it could have been. It just wasn't.
Yeah, I mean,
it wasn't until Think Progress.
You make a good point. I guess what I'm saying is the news media could have and should have juxtaposed those positions without needing the new media to do it. But you make a good point. They didn't. Think Progress dead. Newt Gingrich, there are a lot of conservatives out there who are not supporting him for a variety of reasons, including things like the commercial he did with Nancy Pelosi about the environment, his support of Didi Scozafava, other things like that. So he already, it's not like he comes into this. I mean, if you were to look at his accomplishments, like the Republican Revolution, balancing, working with Clinton to balance it. If you look at his accomplishments and his brilliance and the ideas he has, you might think that he he is like a rock star. If you saw him at CPAC, as you have, Bill, when he comes in from the back of the room with Eye of the Tiger playing, and he walks through the crowd. And, I mean, so you might come away thinking he is this conservative rock star, but, among people on Twitter, among comments and blog chatter, there's a lot of people already skeptical of Gingrich, and I don't think this helps. It also leads to kind of a broader point, which is the amount of, Gingrich really got caught, I think. I don't buy his explanation on Facebook. It strikes me as a little bit weak. But the truth is there's so much hypocrisy going on right now. It's utterly astonishing. And I tweeted this out today, Bill. How many Democrats are supporting the no-fly zone because their guy, Obama, implemented it? And how many Republicans are opposing it because Obama implemented it? I think there are principled people who either support or oppose it on principle, but I would say at least half of the people out there I'm seeing, if Bush was doing it, they'd be for it, but since Obama's doing it, they're against it, and vice versa. I think this whole thing with Newt, he's the guy who may be the face of this phenomenon, but really there's this larger story out there of people and videos coming back to haunt people. And we have like Joe Biden. I saw a video the other day where he was, really critical of Bush, and the things he was saying could be applied to what Obama is doing now. On another topic, videos of Claire McCaskill surfacing where she was talking about the importance of pay your taxes. These videos, there is a new media thing where they come back to bite you more than ever. But long way of saying, I think this hurts Gingrich. It certainly does not help him. But I think that aside from the new media angle, the larger story is just the amount of hypocrisy out there. And American Spectator was writing about sort of the latest. They've been blogging, David Horowitz. Now, I think he's 72 years old now, and he's talking about how his support of Bush and ousting Saddam was sort of the mistakes a quixotic younger man made, but it's like we're in your 60s. But he's apparently changed his mind about the importance of exporting democracy.
Well, to some extent, there's definitely some knee-jerk reactions based on who's sitting in the Oval Office today, but there are also legitimate splits on both the left and the right in terms of foreign policy. There is on the liberal side, there is a belief of interventionism and internationalism that says there are appropriate times to use military force when you have a humanitarian, democratic goal as opposed to a narrow nationalistic interest. And if you can put together a real UN-backed coalition or other multilateral coalition, then it's appropriate. And there's another strain of liberalism that is more pacifist and isolationist, which and I'm not using those terms pejoratively.
Right. Well, and the interesting thing is,
on the right, you have the Ron Paul side of isolationism that says government is ineffective whether it's domestically or internationally, and the other side that says that we should be very aggressive in throwing our unilateral military power around. In this case, this is more multilateral, so there's some criticism from the right on that score. Some of that comes out of some legitimate policy differences.
And it's fascinating that there aren't a lot of issues lately that really divide both ideologies. This one really does. It's fascinating to watch because it's making strange bedfellows, to be sure.
But the one thing that does irk me more, I think there's a legitimate debate to be had, and I'm very thankful that I think we're having that debate without people in power smearing those who disagree. But I do think there's a lot of simplistic arguments going around which are not terribly enlightening. To sort of blithely say this is a third war in a Muslim country, well, that doesn't really tell me very much whether this action is on the merits or not.
But I think Gingrich's the whole thing with Newt really underscores the premise that where you stand depends on where you sit, because when Obama wasn't acting, when he appeared to be impotent, you could attack him by saying he should impose a no-fly zone. And then once he does, you oppose. You don't say, I agree with Obama. No, look, I think here's what is fair to say. It's fair to say he waited too long. It's fair to say he has not communicated to the American people why he's doing this. Those are all nuanced positions, but it just strikes me that...
Are you saying that you support the use of nuance?
Well, as always. Yeah.
You were not on the Romney bandwagon then. That man hates nuance.
Well, let's talk about that, Bill. This is I want to segue into the Matt Lewis primary, but I do want to make another quick point before I do that, because it relates to Think Progress, which I want to say misinterpreted, because I want to believe they didn't do this on purpose. But I did an interview with Herman Cain the other week that I posted at the Daily Caller, where I went into his childhood, and he grew up in segregated Atlanta, and Herman Cain told me this story about he was like 10 years old, and he was shopping with his mom and his brother, and he wanted to get some water, and his mom said, just go to the quote, as he would say, the colored water fountain. Don't go to the white's water fountain. So he went, and his brother looked out, and they actually drank out of the white water fountain. And I asked Herman, what lesson he learned, and he said, it all tastes the same. What's the big deal? Now, clearly to me when he said that, my interpretation was that Cain meant that segregation, this racism, this discrimination was pointless, it was arbitrary, and people, in other words, I found it hard to believe. I certainly didn't conclude that a child who grew up under Jim Crow was in any way an apologist for segregation. But that is how Think Progress interpreted it. And I don't know if they've updated. I don't think they have changed their site. I should look. But and also
what's right is an example of where you can cherry pick quote.
Right.
And if you took the quote, just it all tastes the same by itself, it can certainly seem like you are being very cavalier about segregationism, whereas it could just as easily be that it was a revelation as a child that this whole idea of separation was stupid.
Exactly.
Because you're not even, it's not even different.
Right. No, that was, so in any event, I sincerely hope that it was just a mistaken, that they interpreted it wrong. I think it's sort of a Rorschach test, how you interpret that statement. But in any event, so...
But that was on your Daily Caller blog, as well as your newly established Matt Lewis primary. You laid out a set of 10 criteria to rate how well the preliminary presidential primary campaigns are going. And Herman Cain did quite well. He came in number 2, but the surprise winner was Tim Pawlenty, whose exploratory committee announcement video was being mocked a lot on Twitter, at least, and also by Stephen Colbert, for using these kind of Cloverfield, J.J. Abrams, movie shaky camera techniques. I actually thought it was a pretty good video. The techniques aside, of the messaging of the video was better than what I've seen from a lot of other candidacies. But that wasn't really the criteria you were using in making your assessment.
No, I mean, I tried to come up with 10 attributes that candidates ought to have if they're going to win. Like, one is the ability to raise money, one is charisma, one is gravitas. You go down the list. And what I found is that Pawlenty actually is checking off all the boxes. I might say he's minimally acceptable to the most number of people. And my analysis is that I think that Pawlenty is going to be, or could be, everybody's second choice. That, the saying that Democrats fall in love, but Republicans fall in line. I don't know that anybody loves Pawlenty, but I think that he is, just basically going through this, how do you win an election, and winning every category that he needs to be considered an acceptable nominee. And at the end of the day, there are people who love Palin, but there are people who hate Palin. Same thing with Romney, right? But I really feel like Pawlenty is palatable to everyone, and he's maybe not excelling in any one area, but he is doing sufficient in almost every area. And when you actually go through and sort of rate these categories, he was actually the clear winner. Again, you know, I'm gonna do this probably every month, and things could change between now and you know, election day. But it was a fascinating exercise to go through. And actually, I did notice, I haven't read the piece yet, but Reed Wilson over at National Journal put up a piece, I think today, that the headline at least seems to confirm my findings. I think it was titled something like, "Is Tim Pawlenty the credible alternative?" So I think you could, you know, I think there may be something to this. Everybody check it out at the Daily Caller, and you know, feel free to
now.
post
Have you
comments.
gotten any conservative feedback yet, either agreeing with it or disagreeing with it? I mean, there's certainly some conservatives that are not thrilled with Pawlenty because he has acknowledged the reality of global warming and suggested he would support cap and trade at one point, although he's not like telling that today. I haven't heard this lately, but I remember him at CPAC talking about the need to allow for importation of prescription drugs from Canada, which has generally been seen as a Democratic position. And he's had a couple of you know, breaks from the party line like that. You credit him for maintaining the three-legged stool of fiscal, national, and social conservatism in your primary, but could that be weakened as some of these issues become more elevated?
Glad you asked, because I actually think it could. I think that right now, this is all based on perception. And, you know, while Mitch Daniels' trucer comment has been a huge controversy, and that hurt him with the three-legged stool, meaning, you know, you have to be a fiscal, social, and national security conservative. Pawlenty's, you know, environmentalist stuff, maybe the fact that he's boring, ironically, benefits him. A lot of people haven't talked about it. It is from a few years ago. He has moved away from it. It's been a slow progression. Unlike Newt Gingrich's, you know, changing his position on the no-fly zone in about 15 minutes, Pawlenty's evolution, sort of just away from stressing the environment, has been over the course of years. So right now it doesn't hurt him. Now, if he were to emerge as a front runner, then you could certainly imagine people would start talking about this, start running TV ads about it, maybe dig up video of him talking about it, and then I would probably have to change my rating. So some of my ratings are really based on perception, and I think at this point the perception of Pawlenty is that he is a full spectrum conservative, and I think that some of the other stuff has been largely forgotten or ignored.
Though I'd also add the last two Republican nominees for presidents also acknowledged global warming's existence and advocated for cutting carbon emissions. So it's not like that position has been the death knell for presidential nominees in the past, although perhaps the issue is more of a litmus test since President Obama's come into office.
Well, I think that the whole thing with the environment, regardless of where you stand on the issue, it's never been that important. In the sense that,
but now it's the linchpin towards one world government and our demise as of the American way of life. So perhaps,
well, and it could have an economic impact with like cap and trade. But I think that even people who say that they're like environmentalists, still rank it like number 10 on their list of priorities. I mean, it's not you know. So it's never been there are a lot of people who have a position on it, but the intensity hasn't been. It hasn't been, you know, so people aren't voting on it. I mean, a handful of, you know, tree huggers are, but by and large, even regardless of how you feel about it, that's not a defining issue in terms of, you know, I'm going to vote for this guy because he's pro-life. That will trump where he stands on the environment. So that's just my take anyway, but we'll see. And as I said, I think it could be an issue, and I'm sure it will be used against Pawlenty at some point.
All right, well, why don't we leave it there, Mr. Lewis? Always great to talk to you.
Yeah, Bill, always good talking to you.
And we'll have Kristen Soltis back on next week. We'll catch you in a couple weeks,
All right,
Matt.
man.
But always check out Matt's blogging and his new home at the Daily
Yeah.
Caller, dailycaller.com. No the, right? Just Daily Caller.
Dailycaller.com.
All right, and you can see me at liberaloasis.com and ourfuture.org. My podcast is still going at liberaloasis.com. Is your podcast coming back?
It is actually, and I'm about to interview later today this guy who wrote Moonwalking with Einstein, Joshua Foer. Fascinating book about how to improve your memory. He actually won a memory contest. So interesting stuff. Moonwalking with Einstein, and it'll be up on the Matt Lewis podcast.
Excellent. All right. Till next week. This has been This Week in Block.
Thanks.
Take care.